Have you ever read stories of heroism and asked yourself, what would I do in a similar circumstance? Well, I have. Never really wanted to put myself in a position like that, but I thought, what would I do in a similar circumstance? Well, not too long ago, a few years back, I had an opportunity that could have defined for me how I may react. 16 of us were riding ATVs, all-terrain vehicles, in the eastern hills of Utah. The trails were a little bit difficult, and because we had some people that had never ridden with us before, we had to go at a slower speed. 8 hours on the trail. Some of us were anxious to get some of the aggression out and relieve some of the stress when we were coming up, putting our vehicles on trailers, preparing for dinner, when an announcement came that dinner would be delayed by 30 minutes. I had two friends, Bob and Ryan, who were with me in wanting to travel faster. Ryan turned to Bob and said, "Hey, will you go out and ride? We've got 30 minutes. Let's go out and have some fun on the hills." Bob turned to me, "Jaron, will you go?" And I thought to myself, I really shouldn't. I had a feeling in my heart that I shouldn't. Competitive juices, wanting to relieve the stress, all those excuses start coming to mind. But Bob said to Ryan, "I'll go if Jaron goes." That put the added pressure on me, and I went. Cautious at first, knowing that my heart had told me not to go, but we had some fun and we were safe on the hills. When we came to the crest of a small hill, Ryan challenged me to a race. Again, that instinct kicked in and I thought, don't do it. But I did. We rode, we had fun, nothing happened. Bob had headed back to dinner, was ahead of us on the trail. When we finished, I turned and thought, how fun would it be to beat Bob back to dinner? So off I went, full speed, going down the trails, just having a grand old time. No longer having the hesitation of my conscience saying, don't do this. I was well ahead of Ryan at the time, catching up to Bob. I caught him at a very high speed just before we were to go through a gate. And I thought at the time, I need to go off the trail to pass him. Do I have enough time to go back around and both of us travel through the gate safely at the same time? Made the calculations, assumed everything would be okay. So off I went off the trail. Very rough ride, as you can imagine, riding on an ATV off the trail. As I came along Bob's side, he looked over at me with a shocked look on his face, wondering what on earth was happening with me passing on the outside off of a trail. My calculations had assumed that I'd just be able to pass him and we'd go through the gate. Well, to no complaint, Bob, in his competitive spirit, thought, okay, I'll beat you. He throttled up. We started going at the same rate of speed. That then put us in a very difficult situation because there is not enough time for us to stop or both make it through the gate at the same time. It was that at that moment I thought to myself, I have two choices. I can try to overtake Bob, get in front of him by enough distance that I cannot harm either of us and go through the gate, or I could push Bob out of the way. He wasn't as experienced a rider as me, and make it through safely. I knew that that second decision would cause great harm for Bob, potentially even being fatal for him, because the gates were made out of railroad ties. So made the decision that I would maintain my speed, going as fast as the machine would go, and as soon as I realized that I was clear of Bob's front wheel with my back wheel, I'd make a move to go through the gate. Well, as luck would have it, I'm going along, made just enough time looking back, and I thought to myself, okay, here I go. Made my move in front of Bob to get through the gate when my machine hit the railroad tie. I've got to tell you, what seemed like instantaneous fractional sections decisions became moments of time standing still for me, because the next thing I knew, and I to this day don't know how I left the machine without harm, but I was flying like Superman through the air. I had to have been going probably 50 to 60 miles an hour, and I'm just flying through the air. Time standing still, enough distance. I had enough time while I was in the air to think about my landing. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tuck and roll when I hit and do as little bodily damage as I can in landing on the ground. I flew down the trail across the road and hit the rocky ground, hit my left shoulder first, tumbled up on over, landed on my hip and rolled a little bit more to lay back, looking towards where I had come from, to see that my machine is behind me, coming end over end and lands right on top of me. The pain was excruciating, and I thought, well, I don't know what happened to Bob. I pushed the machine off of me to see him now coming towards me. He's coming, and he brakes as quickly as he can, and because he brakes so quickly, he flies over the top of his machine and kind of rolls on the ground. At that time, not going fast enough to get hurt. I pushed the machine off. I'm laying there in excruciating pain, and I look over and I said, Bob, are you okay? And he said yes, and I could tell by the look on his face that he was a little bit concerned about what had happened to me. I'm laying there in shock, in pain, so I kind of roll over and try to navigate standing up. With extreme difficulty, I find myself standing up for about a millisecond, because as soon as I got to my feet, I collapsed like a bag of flour onto the ground, little puff of dust. And I've got to tell you, I was sitting there thinking, what on earth just happened? I looked down and I noticed I couldn't move my legs. I can't explain the fear that goes through your mind when you think, I wonder if I'm paralyzed and will no longer walk again. I'm laying there looking, and I thought, I just need to do a survey. And so I felt around to see if I had any broken bones, if I could see any blood on me, and I couldn't see anything, but I couldn't move my legs. Out in a remote area, a distance away, my friends started to gather around me, and I could tell by the shock look on their face, they were concerned about what was happening. Time isn't your friend when you're in pain, when you're wondering if you're going to be able to walk again. It took some time for the ambulance to arrive. When it finally arrived, I remember, oddly enough, thinking as they approached and wanted to cut my clothes off, I said, well, you can't cut my clothes off. Look at all the people that are laying around here. So they were very kind. People dispersed. They put me in the ambulance on a spine board, and off we went to the hospital. At the hospital, Bob showed up, Ryan showed up, and then a very dear friend of mine, Jeff. The three of us were there. I knew they were hungry and had spent a long day and was a little bit embarrassed about what was happening, but my mind was occupied with what had happened. Bob, a man of faith, me, a man of faith, offered to give me a blessing. And I've got to tell you, at that time when you're looking for some kind of an answer, some kind of a resolution, it's very reassuring. So Bob gave me this blessing of prayer, and immediately, throughout my entire body, I felt a certain level of comfort that is very difficult to describe, because I go from excruciating pain, concern, and worry to a position of relatively reasonable comfort. And I remember thinking to myself as I was looking at Bob, I wonder if I just learned what I'd do. Because this man is there for giving me this blessing, and if I would have made the other decision to push him out of the way, the tables would have been turned. It would have been him in harm's way, potentially a fatal accident, and I was grateful that I learned where my heart may be in a time like that. And I can't express to you the words of comfort that that's given me over the last 4 years, knowing that perhaps I am the type of individual that would look out for the welfare of another before my own. For that, I'm grateful. Thank you.